Here's the thing. You love poetry. You just might not know it yet. I know that because you listen to music. And in every song that you listen to, almost probably, there is poetry. And I would say that lyrics, for most people, are one of the most important parts of the song. The biggest pop culture event of last year was Kendrick Lamar hopefully burying Drake's career. And he did it by writing poetry. I can't count how many videos I saw of people poring over Kendrick's lyrics, looking at the metaphors and the rhyme scheme and the historical and modern allusions. These are all poetic devices, and people loved it. They latched onto it. They couldn't stop digging and digging and digging. The children crave poetry almost as much as they crave the minds. Now, I know most people don't listen to lyrics and automatically jump to poetry. Instead, I imagine that when you think of poetry, you think of three things. One, old-timey Shakespeare poems that you can't really understand because the English that they used back then is not really the English that we use now. Two, a Dr. Seuss type rhymey poem mostly made for children, or at least sounds like it was made for children. And three, a parody of some avant-garde spoken word poetry where they just say a word and another word and another word and then people snap. I'm not gonna say that those things aren't poetry, because they are, but I am gonna say that poetry is more than just rhyming and being confusing. I'm not gonna say that most poetry is easy, but if your first inclination for poetry or any art form is to understand it, then I think you're kind of missing the point. You don't listen to a song for the first time and immediately understand it, right? You probably missed half the lyrics along the way. No one hears a guitar solo or a piano piece and they're like, oh, well, I just don't understand it. For some reason, we've chosen some art forms to be ones that need to be understood, and other art forms as ones that we allow to be abstract. Music, mostly being abstract, some paintings being abstract, and people still complain about that too. If it's just paintings and it's not a picture of a person or a picture of a house, people are like, oh, well, I don't get it. But I would argue that most art forms are abstract and literal. So just like every art form, how many times can I say art form in a video? Just like all art, your first step for poetry should not be to understand it, but to feel it. Are you caught by a particular phrase like you would be caught by a particular color in a painting or a particular note in a song? You should let it mull around in your head, read it out loud and listen to the musicality, the close rhymes, the alliteration, the repetition of particular ideas and motifs. And then maybe you'll start to get it. And that's not to say that poetry has no meaning. Of course it has meaning. Of course, when the poet sits down to write a poem, they have an idea in mind, but it's not in the way that a prose writer has an idea in mind. At least not most of the time. Everything I'm saying, don't take it as strict fact. There is always going to be some crossover, blah, 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 life is a spectrum, blah, blah, blah. I think this is a hang-up that some people have. They read a story and they expect they read a poem and they expect a story, or they expect a kind of like a mini essay or something that just tells you what you're supposed to think, how you're supposed to feel. Yes, some poems are like that. We have prose poems, and we have poems that are quite heavy-handed and telling you what you're supposed to feel. But that's not all poetry is. And that's not what you should go into a poem expecting. Poetry is more about taking a singular moment or a singular idea and unpacking it, stretching it out, figuring out what is familiar, what is unfamiliar, and turning it on its head. And it's not constrained by rising and falling action like most prose is. In the same way that, music is constrained by scales, and visual art is constrained by color theory. And in that way, I would say that poetry is the most freeing type of art. And I know that's probably controversial. And if you're a painter, if you're a musician, if you're, what are other art forms? If you're a woodworker, sculptor, then come for me in the comments. Let's have a conversation about it. However, I think that poetry really hits that mark because if you slap a few words onto a page, that's a poem. It might not be a good one, but you can really, really explore different ways of writing poetry. And if the words are pretty enough or ugly enough, that's a poem. And I think that freedom scares people. Not consciously, but in the world we live in, we've been taught, all of us have been taught, that there is one way to do life. You can veer off a little bit over here, a little bit over here, but generally, there are a particular way of doing things. We must work a 9-to-5 job. We must get married. We must follow gender roles. We must not question authority. And if we challenge any of those things, society is gonna collapse. The structure is the authority. And people cling to that. Not only because it's safe, but because it's easy. But, and just hear me out, look at the world around you. Is this the world you want to live in? Do you want to continue down this path? And are you really fulfilled? We've got war and genocide and poverty all around us. And the question rises, will we even be able to continue like this if we want to? I think it's clear that we're on a sinking ship, and we can either jump to the lifeboats or we can sink with it. Enter poetry. Now, I'm not saying that poetry is gonna change the world, but maybe. Just like art in general, I'm a huge proponent of any art form, but poetry is my favorite, so that's what I'm gonna talk about. I would say the purpose of good poetry is to challenge us, to expand the way our brain considers concepts and ideas and images, to build new synapses in your brain and find connections and allow your brain to unveil universal truths that you've felt your whole life but just never had words to identify. And poetry, again, good poetry, connects you to the environment, to your community, and to yourself. And you're not gonna get that by rewatching The Office. Do people still rewatch The Office? That maybe is a dated reference, but I don't really watch TV. What do people rewatch now? That's no shade to The Office. I've rewatched The Office maybe 3 times, 4 times, all the way through. It's funny. Offensive. Doesn't always age well, but very funny. And I also play Pokemon and watch professional wrestling. These are not the heights of challenging art form. So I'm not saying that everything that you read has to challenge you and push you, but maybe some of it should. Because if you just keep doing what you're doing, you're gonna keep doing what you're doing. And I know a lot of people, especially my generation and younger, are not happy with how things are going. We can't afford to continue down this path. So, is poetry gonna change the world? Not alone. There's a lot of other things that you have to do. You've got to organize, you've got to build community, you've got to fight back against, people who are actively destroying the planet. But art can help you do that. Change comes from, small groups of people, but you can do stuff on an individual level, and one of those things that you can do is expand your mind. We need to break down the barriers that are in our mind, and I know that poetry can do that because it's done it for me. And it's not just about like, oh, I learned something new from poetry, but poetry made me see something in a new way. Again, it takes the mundane and changes it into something revolutionary. Again, good poetry. So, if any of that interests you, hi, my name's Jackie. I'm a poet and a teacher. I'm from America, but now I live in Vietnam. And my friends are surely tired of me constantly bringing up poetry. So I need other people to talk to. My plan is to take individual poems and try to deconstruct them, so that they're easier to understand. I want to dive into particular writers and their writing style. I want to make videos exploring different poetic devices. In general, my goal is to make poetry less scary. I will also do other booktube things like vlogs and reviews and monthly catch-ups and everything. And I love prose. I love all writing, so it's not just gonna be poetry, but I do want to focus on that. And honestly, I have too many interests: politics, nature, history, religion, philosophy, astronomy. I'm not gonna limit myself to just poetry or just writing. I'm surely going to talk about these other things, but I'm going to try to do it through the lens of particular poems or particular poets. So, if you're interested, please like, subscribe, all that, blah, blah, blah. And I hope to see you in the next video.